Live on WFLA Now. With a specialized degree in climate, Chief Meteorologist and Climate Specialist Jeff Baradelli is pioneering the way we look at climate and extreme weather. Welcome to Jeff's Climate Classroom, powered by ArmorView Window and Door.
And welcome to Climate Classroom. We appreciate you being here. It has been crazy in the climate over the past several weeks. Everything is off the charts. And what I wanted to do here with this graphic is show you, kind of put into context, the warming that we're seeing over the past 100 years as opposed to where it was before. And JB, if we can take the banner off the bottom of the screen just real quick, I want to show folks this graphic in full. And what you'll be able to see is where the Ice Age was. So that's the Ice Age. Which was about 20,000 years ago. You can see how temperatures have warmed. Then all of a sudden, at the Industrial Revolution, temperatures just shoot straight up. We're going to talk a lot more about this graphic. We're going to also talk about the big news in climate, which is that we this week have had our hottest days on record since we've been keeping records, and likely in 120,000 years. We're going to try to put it into context, talk about it in terms of climate change, but also in terms of El Nino. I want to welcome my co-host today and guest, and my good friend, Catherine Nemchek. Catherine is a climate communications specialist. Me and Catherine have worked together for many, many, many years, and here we are again addressing climate at this time when I've never seen so many of Earth's vital signs flashing red at the same time. This story has picked up traction because of all the various factors and facets that are coming together around the earth right now, Catherine. I'm sure you probably see a lot of it in your feeds, and the people you're talking to are probably talking about it as well.
Yeah, well, actually, right off the bat, I'd love to ask you, and just to remind people, what are Earth's vital signs?
We measure a lot of things on Earth, right? We measure the Earth's temperature. That's what you hear about most often. So the surface temperature, which is the temperature of the atmosphere just above the surface, and then also the surface of the ocean. So the upper couple of meters of the oceans. That's the one that's most common. I would say the most consequential of any of those is the ocean heat content. That's a measure of just the ocean temperature, but a lot deeper into the very deep ocean, thousands of feet down. The ocean stores around 90% of the excess heat that we are causing because of greenhouse gases and climate change. And so the oceans just show a steady increase. They don't go up and down with the change of climate cycles like El Nino. But one of the things that the reason why this is garnering so much attention right now is it's Earth's surface temperature. It's where we live, right? It's where we breathe. It's what causes our weather. And that is off the charts. I mean, we are far into record territory. And that's not going to end. It's going to be the case all summer, Catherine, because El Nino is just beginning. It's just ratcheting up, which is a natural oscillation on top of this steady drumbeat of climate change that's been happening over the past 100 years. El Nino is going to double in strength likely by the fall, which means that all of these records are going to continue to fall over and over again. The extremes we're seeing now will pale into comparison as to what we're going to see towards the end of the summer, probably.
In what areas are we seeing this? Everywhere?
So you asked about surface temperature, like Antarctica. Antarctica, again, is at a record low in terms of the sea ice growth. It's winter there. The ice should be growing. Instead, they are about the size of India short of sea ice. That's how low the sea is, about 3 million square kilometers short of where they should be. Again, far into record territory. And the oceans, by the way, also far into record territory. Just simply impossible without human-caused climate change. We would never be able to reach these ocean temperature levels without it. Someone calculated the chance of the Atlantic Ocean and global temperatures being this warm without human-caused climate change, and it's like 1 in billions. So it just can't happen. Wow. It just can't happen without the extra warming that we've added. Oceans have warmed by around 2 degrees Fahrenheit. So there's lots of vital signs, and I went through a bunch of them that are off the charts. Not all are, though. I should be honest about that. Sea ice in the Arctic is like the 10th or 13th lowest it's ever been. So it's low, but it's not at a record low. The United States temperature actually has been relatively warm. Relatively cool, relatively mild so far over the past month and a half or so. Things have changed now. It's starting to get much hotter, but during the month of June, it was relatively mild. So it's not everywhere on Earth, and there are people that are probably watching from California, or people are watching from the East Coast saying, it's been a really mild, kind of almost cool spring transition into summer. That's true, but only in the U.S. Most other areas are very warm right now.
That's fascinating. We have a question.
Okay.
First question. So I'll bring it up now. What caused the increase prior to the Industrial Revolution?
That's great. So, JB, if we could take this graphic full, and I want to go through this graphic one by one, and then I have another graphic that is annotated even better than that. All right. So there's that graphic, and I'm going to promise JB that next time we do this, I will make sure there's nothing on the bottom of the screen. He's laughing at me right now. He's laughing at me because I'm making his job even harder. But don't worry, I'm going to give you a bonus when we're done with this. All right. So looking at this graphic right here, and it's pretty simple, right? About 20,000 years ago, that's when we were emerging out of the last ice age. So the viewer question was this: what happened? Why was it warming? Well, we were emerging out of the last ice age, and the ice ages, and we've seen every 100,000 years or so, we see another ice age. That's just due to natural cycles. That's due to the Earth's orbit around the sun, and also the tilt of the Earth. It varies very little over tens of thousands of years, and that changes the amount of sun that is absorbed on the Earth. And so therefore, over the course of tens of thousands of years, Earth warms and cools steadily. So when we come out of ice ages, temperatures steadily warm. You can see from 20,000 years ago to about 10,000 years ago, when the age of modern humans took place, the Earth warmed around 3 degrees Celsius, okay, during that 10,000 years. However, if you look at what happened around the Industrial Revolution, our temperatures started shooting straight up. By 2100, it is likely that we will have warmed the Earth by another 3 degrees Celsius, but this time, instead of 10,000 years, it would have happened in 200 years. That means our rate of warming right now is at least 50 times greater. And one other thing I want to mention is look at that space in between 10,000 years ago and the Industrial Revolution beginning. Temperatures were steady on the Earth for about 10,000 years. Now, they changed a little bit. We had the Little Ice Age, which occurred a few hundred years ago. There were a few episodes around the world of regional temperatures that cooled. But in general, the average global temperatures have stayed between that 0 and 1. That 0 baseline is the 20th century average temperature. And everything is measured from the average of the 20th century. So it was cooler, obviously, 10,000 years ago, and it's getting much warmer now. So that's kind of a scaled down version, Catherine, of this graphic, but I do have another graphic which has a lot more detail on it as well. And thank you, Mary, for the question, by the way.
Yeah, thank you. And actually, I wanted to throw in another one. What contributes the most to global warming?
That's a great question. Thank you, Stacia. So actually, it is water vapor. It is not carbon dioxide, right? So let's talk about that. Water vapor is the strongest of the greenhouse gases. But there's a problem. When you put more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, it raises the air temperature. And when the air temperature goes up, it can fit more water vapor. It's like a bigger sponge. So by increasing the carbon dioxide, we are creating an environment on Earth to accept more water vapor. And so as water vapor goes up, it then adds a feedback and makes it warmer. And by warming the atmosphere, we end up releasing even more carbon dioxide from the places where carbon dioxide is stored on Earth, namely the oceans and also the land masses. So it creates a bit of a feedback loop. But the most important greenhouse gas is water vapor. However, what starts the process, or at least this time has started the process, is this injection of a lot of extra carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Our carbon dioxide for thousands and thousands of years has generally been around 280 parts per million, okay, before the Industrial Revolution, somewhere around that. Now we are at 420 parts per million. So we've increased our carbon dioxide that much in a matter of a very short period of time. So hopefully, was that, do you think I answered the question?
Yeah,
Okay.
I think it's something that we kind of forget about. But I'd love to hear more about this graphic.
Okay. So JB, if I can annoy you, and I promise I'm going to give you an extra bonus for it. You can take the graphics out at the bottom of the screen and let's go through. So we're looking at the last 10,000 years, and I've kind of talked about, 20,000 years, and I've kind of talked about this. The reason why we know that it's the warmest now that it has ever been in 120,000 years is because 20,000 years ago, we were in an ice age. And that ice age goes back about 100,000 years. The peak of the last interglacial, and we are living in an interglacial right now, so in between glacial periods or in between ice ages, that was about 120,000 years ago. And we know through proxy data, we can talk more about that too, we know by looking at proxy data that it was about 1 degree Celsius warmer during the peak of the last interglacial than it is today, okay? Sea level was also about 30 feet higher than it is today. That's how much small changes in temperatures can change the makeup of the Earth. Well, if you look at this graphic, you can see, and we talked about this, that it took 10,000 years to warm 3 Celsius. Then we had a stable climate where we invented agriculture, and humans thrived during that past 10,000 years. We also had an area towards the end, right before the Industrial Revolution right there, called the Little Ice Age, which wasn't just one little ice age. It was several disparate regional cooling episodes over the course of 200-300 years around the Earth, but it wasn't really didn't have a big global impact, although temperatures did go down a little bit during that time, and it caused major disruption, especially in places like Europe, if you know your history. But then all of a sudden, around the Industrial Revolution, our temperatures shoot straight up. Remember, we're looking on the scale of 20,000 years. So we've warmed by about 1.2 degrees Celsius, so about 2 degrees Fahrenheit. That's as of 2023. By 2032, we expect 1.5 degrees Celsius of warming. And by 2050, we expect that to get to around 2 degrees Celsius. It's not a guarantee, but it's probably going to happen. After that, it's really up to us, Catherine. It's really up to humans and society to determine how much we want to ratchet back our emissions of carbon dioxide and methane so that we can curb the amount of warming. It's unlikely we're going to be able to curb below 2 degrees. And right now, current policies say that we're probably headed to around 2.7. If you trust current government policies and if the accounting is correct, and that's a big if. But there's also the outside chance that we warm as much as 4 degrees. So if we were to do that, we will have accomplished warming more in 200 years than we did in 10,000 years coming out of the last ice age naturally. And the problem is not so much the warming, it's the rate of warming that is the big problem. Can human civilizations, and more so, can animals and plants adapt fast enough in that kind of climate? We've never seen anything like that in human history. And by the way, if we warm to 3 to 4 degrees Celsius, we will probably have a warmer climate than we've seen in over 1 million years on Earth. And probably a lot further back than that.
Yeah. And what's sort of the impacts that you'll see with 4 degrees warming? That
is catastrophic and maybe existential if we were to see 4 degrees Celsius of warming. I can go on and on about all the impacts, but obviously there would be major impacts to food systems, to availability of water. I think the bigger problem is as you start to compete with other societies on Earth as humans for limited resources, because we're going to see compound heat waves and compound droughts happen at the same time all over Earth. It's going to really hurt our food supply and also our supply chains. We saw a little bit of evidence of what happens during COVID, right? And how everything kind of slows down. When you do that, all of a sudden you're pitting humans against humans. At the same time, the natural world is dying because it can't adapt fast enough, and now there's less resources. So you end up with international security issues, mass migration, people at some point in the next several decades being forced to move because their areas are now being inundated by sea level rise. So I'm not a doomer, and I'm not an alarmist. And Catherine, you know me pretty well. I mean, do you ever see me really worry about stuff?
No,
I'm a pretty
never.
level-headed So I'm coming at this from an analytical perspective. We have some serious, serious problems if we get past, 2.5, 3 degrees Celsius of warming. But here's the good news, and this is the truth. Unlike a terminal, when a doctor comes to you and says that you have a terminal illness, they may know what's causing it. They don't have any way of solving it. Here's the thing about climate change. We know exactly what's causing it. We know exactly how to solve it. And by the way, we have every single solution that we need right here in our hands at the present moment. What we don't have is political willpower. And that's because there's a lot of money invested in the current system and in the current infrastructure. So there are a lot of people who just want to keep making money off the system. I'm one of those people. I am one of those people. I have money invested. I don't want to see my money down the drain, right? So this is a big problem that we have to solve. We have to figure out how to make this transition and do it in a way where it doesn't harm people. It doesn't take people's jobs away. We're often running on that because of all the money that's being poured into the U.S. economy and manufacturing right now, especially in the middle of the country with new EV plants, new battery plants, and all this money that's going into increasing manufacturing. So we are well on the way. Problem is can the system that we have, which we're trying to sustain and reinvent for the future, this green industrial revolution, can that coexist with a reduction in emissions to the point where it doesn't disrupt the climate so much that we are still in a perilous situation 30, 50 years from now?
One question from Stacia, what can we do to help the naysayers to take this seriously? I was sort of thinking about, the recent wildfire smoke. And I guess what stuck out to me is that it doesn't matter who you are and where your money is invested. We're all feeling that.
Yeah, and it's going to continue, right? I mean, all summer we're going to have problems with smoke in the Great Lakes, the Ohio Valley, and the Northeast. Now, it's going to be a different place every year, right? This is the thing about climate change is it's not like a couple of years ago it was California, right? Now, all of a sudden, it's New York because it's coming from Canada. The way that climate change works is it makes the extremes worse given the prevailing climate pattern that particular year. So if the prevailing climate pattern, this year El Nino is a big part of it, right? El Nino is forcing all kinds of weird stuff happening around the earth. Well, it just so happens that the heat dome is set up over Canada this year. Next year, it may be the Pacific Northwest. It may be the middle of the country, middle of the U.S. It may be in Siberia. But we're seeing more of these concurrent heat domes and therefore more of these concurrent droughts, more of these escalated wildfire situations. And it's not just the smoke you breathe in, which, by the way, is very bad for people's health, very bad. Creates cardiovascular issues, not just lung issues, and also birth defects as well. But it's not just the smoke, right? It's everything else too. It's insurance premiums. Insurance companies don't want to underwrite homeowners insurance policies in California anymore. And the more we get bigger hurricanes in the Atlantic Ocean, the more that insurance companies aren't going to want to underwrite policies in Florida. And so it's hitting people not only health-wise now, and we're seeing that in the Northeast and the Ohio Valley in California, but also insurance-wise. These impacts will continue to increase. And by the way, one thing that people don't connect the dots on is prices of food. Trust me, it's there's a lot of things disrupting the prices of food right now, and the prices of goods. One of those is climate change. When you disrupt the supply chains, which are being disrupted for various things, right? There's the war in Ukraine and Russia as well, but climate is a part of that. And it increases the prices that we pay every day for stuff. But we don't know. We don't realize that the reason why the cost of our bread has gone up significantly, or coffee, a part of that at least is climate change. That makes it tough for people to pin the tail on the donkey, right? Because there's so many different competing factors as to why their prices are going up. But people do notice it when it starts to impact their lifestyle.
And does it impact more than just food? What other
insurance,
well, yeah,
mortgages,
insurance,
the value of people's homes. I mean,
right.
Which is most people's, the largest portion of their value. When water starts to flow into areas that, that have these big, expensive homes, I mean, are you going to be able to sell your home? Will any banks offer you a mortgage? Or is it just really rich people who are going to be able to afford to buy it because they can buy it with cash and they don't have to have insurance on it or get a mortgage on it? We're going to start to see that happen. Look, the city of Miami Beach invested about $500 million to install pumps and raise the streets about 3 feet. I lived there when they were doing it. I was stuck in the traffic when they were doing it. It's really miraculous what they have done. But nobody invests $500 million. It's a small city. The city of Miami Beach has a lot of money because a lot of tourism and there's a lot of rich people who live there, but it's a small city. They invested $500 million to raise their roads because the water's coming up from underneath. So yeah, I can go on and on about the impacts. JB, can we again take this graphic full? I want to show, because we talked about what's happening over the last 20,000 years. Let's show you what's been happening over the past 2,000 years. And again, the zero baseline that you see where it goes from red to blue, that is the average temperature of the 20th century. So when I was born, when you were born, Catherine. And you can see when you measure it against that, temperatures have been below the 20th century mark since, from 1850 back to, around the time that Jesus was born, so 2,000 years ago. And then all of a sudden, Earth's temperature shoots straight up. Not so much in the late 1800s, but more so starting in the middle of the 1900s, and especially from 1980 onward. You can see how quickly that temperature is spiking. So that is pretty stark. When you look at that, you say, wow, look at how much change we've seen in a very short period of time. And the chickens are starting to come home to roost. We're seeing it. It's just the beginning of that, unfortunately, for us.
Yeah, it's a really incredible graphic.
I know you're looking for comments from folks.
Yes, I am, but also you were quiet on that end. I was wondering if you were still there.
Oh no, I'm
some weather
no,
on
I'm
this
here.
end.
I'm here. I just I wanted to see if you had any more questions about that.
So far, no, but
okay.
I mean, Stacia is doing a good job keeping up with us. But she mentions here the problem is political parties in distrust. I think that makes a really good point. How can we convince these political parties to take note? I mean, without these sort of obvious major impacts.
Our system is built on capitalism. So money speaks. And when the industries that are powering this renewable energy revolution get big enough and they have enough push and sway in our political systems, things will begin to change. Now, a lot of money is pouring into the middle of the nation right now. About 80% of the benefit from the Inflation Reduction Act, the IRA, that's going to middle America to try to revive these communities that where manufacturing had been shipped overseas over the past, 30, 40 years or so. I will say I have firsthand experience with that because my dad worked in the garment industry in Manhattan. And at one point, he was making all of his clothing in Brooklyn, New York, of all places. But I watched during his career, all that began to be shipped overseas. And it wasn't just, it wasn't just clothing, right? It was everything. So the manufacturing in the center of the country has gone by the wayside. It's created big political problems because there are a lot of communities that feel like they're being left behind. The design of the Inflation Reduction Act is such that it's pouring money back into those communities, making them manufacturing hubs for this next industrial revolution, which is essentially the green industrial revolution. So how do you change politics? Unfortunately, in the system that we're in, it's money. It's by having enough money and enough benefit and opportunity in places that are holding up progress to the point where they actually see their future as helping to build this green industrial revolution. And this is going to change everything. We're about to see cars in 10 years. Almost all the new cars will be electric vehicles. Gas stations many of them will have turned into EV charging stations. Batteries are being built all over the world and the United States right now. And even our appliances are going to change. So much is going to change about the way we live our lives. And a lot of that benefit, hopefully, will be here in the United States. That changes political systems, but it takes a long time for that to happen. Yeah.
Well, we have power as consumers. You mentioned the cars, but as consumers, I mean, where can we put our money?
Well, okay. So this is a question that we always get. First of all, we have to understand that it's not our fault. Okay, blaming each individual person on, blaming climate change on each individual person is more of a distraction. We are stuck in the system that we live in. I always hear people say, "Well, if you're trying to help climate change, why do you fly?" Well, because I don't have a choice, right? If I want to get to places that are far away, I have to fly. So this is the system that we're stuck in right now. And it's going to require system change. So that is something that we have to demand as consumers and as voters. If we want to see the world change, then we have to take an active role in making the world change. And yes, I always say, vote with your wallet. show corporations that you don't like what they're doing if you don't like what they're doing, or that you do like what they're doing if they're doing good stuff, right? I mean, so we have to take responsibility as consumers, and that's not easy to do. Most people are just trying to pay their bills. Let's be honest here. This is a really hard thing to do. But clearly it's happening with EVs, right? Many people are realizing that that is the future, that these are the new smart TVs, right? They're no longer the tube televisions, but these are the smart TVs, and this is where the world is moving, and they like the technology. EVs are cool, right? They're definitely also, not only maybe, and some people may not agree that they're good looking, but they're going to do some amazing stuff. Ford F-150 is going to be able to power your house for 3 days if you lose power. I mean, amazing things are to come. So we also have to convince people of the opportunity in changing our future. People don't like change, I get it, but there's really exciting things that are going to be evolving over the next few decades. The world is going to look very, very different soon. And so there's opportunity for everyone in the changes that are coming. How do we change hearts and minds? It's making sure that everyone is part of those opportunities and that they demand change themselves. I mean, if you're not going to be a part of the political or the corporate process, then how do we make change at all? I think it's impossible. That's at least what I always say is you have to plant a seed, and I always say that you should speak with your wallet. That's when people ask me what you can do, because we need system change. Changing your light bulbs is great. You should do that, especially if it rubs off on your children or your children rub off on you as adults. Yeah, so on and so forth.
What about, Mary asked a good question, although I think I'm having trouble bringing it up.
Well, it's okay. You don't have to bring it up. Oh, there it is.
There we go.
Right.
Is there a way to build EV vehicles that don't produce harmful emissions? I mean, there is emissions with these advancements,
Sure.
right?
Yeah, that's great. I'm glad you asked that question, because that is a big question that comes up and I wish I had a graphic show. I have graphics on this. I've done stories on it. You can always, by the way, Mary, you can always look it up on WFLA.com, look at EVs and emissions and look up my name. And you'll see the article comes up and it does a comparison. But basically the way it works is this. EVs produce more emissions when they are built. But if you look at the lifetime of an EV, if you keep the EV for more than a year and a half, okay, and most people, when they buy a new car, they're not going to keep it for less than a year and a half. If you keep the EV for more than a year and a half, then you reach a crossover point where EVs save on pollution, on carbon pollution, and they're a lot cleaner for the environment. But yes, right now, because of the production of batteries especially, EVs are dirtier in the production phase, but a lot more efficient and cleaner over the course of 5 to 10 years. One of the reasons is that if you plug an EV in and you look at the electricity you use, 90% of that goes into turning the wheels. Whereas if you use gas, only about 30% of that turns the wheels. The rest of it's lost. It's very inefficient. Gas is very inefficient. So EVs use direct electricity, and so about 90% of it or so actually runs the car. So you can imagine if you're using 90% of the energy, EVs, versus only 30% of the energy, the gas that's going into a gas-powered car, then EVs are going to be cleaner in the long run. It's just the building stage. Yes, of course, just like everything else, when you build new technology, it gets more efficient and it gets cleaner over time. It's just a matter of figuring out how to make the process efficient. One interesting thing, Toyota put out a statement saying that they think within the next 5 years, they're going to have a solid state battery, which will be easier to make than the lithium batteries we have right now. And will also, instead of having 300 or 400, miles worth of range, closer to like 750 miles of range. So what's going to happen over the next 10 years is going to be amazing in terms of the advances in technology. And the reason I say that is, even if Toyota is not successful in what they're doing, there was another manufacturer, it's actually a Chinese company, that mentioned that it was about to introduce state-of-the-art batteries made out of sodium rather than lithium. People are always worried about the impact of mining lithium, for a good reason, and cobalt as well. There's some major issues, environmental justice issues that are going on with that kind of stuff. And it's also not very clean for the environment, especially in that very local area, right? Mining is never a very clean venture. But sodium batteries, for instance, sodium is readily available everywhere. And these batteries right now can't perform as well as lithium. But you can imagine in 10 years that, let's say, lithium made strides and ends up having 500 or 600 miles of range or more. Well, then sodium batteries, which have close to 200 now, will probably have 3 or 4. So, there'll always be a market for that too. So this concern about the pollution from mining is well-founded, but it may be less consequential in the future once these processes become more efficient and new processes like the solid-state battery or sodium are perfected.
I know there's also concern with disposing of old batteries.
Yeah,
is that valid?
And there's also problems with disposing of nuclear waste, right? I mean, we are a society of 8 billion people. There is going to be waste. We just have to figure out what the most efficient way of living, most sustainable way of living going forward is. Is it going to be perfect? No. Is it going to be polluting? Sure. Are we going to reduce our emissions to zero? It's going to be difficult. But the point is we just need to get better. It's not a matter of being perfect. What do they say? Perfect is the enemy of good or something like that? You ever hear that? Perfect is the enemy of good. It just means that, if you expect perfection, you're never going to solve any problems. You just have to become incrementally better. And what we're doing here in society is we understand that EVs and solar panels and wind turbines, they have problems, right? There's going to be waste. Yes, some of that's going to be recycled. There's going to be EV parts that are recycled, batteries that are recycled, wind turbines that are recycled. Some of that's already happening. But there's still going to be waste. It's just getting better than we are right now. That's it. We can't expect to get rid of all waste. We have 8 billion people who live on this earth. And I see that pushback from people a lot when it comes to combating climate change. Is they push back by saying, well, EVs are dirty, or it's true, but they're not as dirty. And they're getting better, right? Same thing with I say this with TVs as well. I always bring this up because it lingers in my mind every day. You used to go get a smart television 10 years ago, it would cost you $5,000. You get a smart TV today, it's $300. So the price has come down, and the efficiency of making them and the materials needed to make them have also come down as well.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to bring that up, that for a lot of people, electric cars right now are not affordable. But as the technology improves, the price points hopefully drop.
It is, Tesla reduced the prices of a couple of their models substantially this year, maybe just to compete with a very fast expanding market of EVs that are now on the market here in the United States. But I think the goal of Tesla years ago was to keep reducing the price of their cars. I mean, look. Yes, the more of them on the market, the more competition. Capitalism would dictate that the prices will go down to some degree, but they are a little less affordable. The break-even point is that, you not only have to buy a gas car, which maybe it's $5,000 or $10,000 less right now, but then you have to fuel it over the course of 5 or 10 years. So so many cars are getting closer to their break-even point. It may still cost more to buy an EV, but within a few years or so of not having to spend money on gas, because electric's a lot cheaper, you end up saving money in the long run. So it's just a matter of how long you're going to have that car, if it makes it worth it to you. As EV prices go down, the break-even point will be a lot faster.
This has come up in the comments. Is there still a need for fossil fuels, do you think?
For sure, there will be a need for fossil fuels. Right now, there's processes that are very hard to decarbonize, especially industrial processes. We've talked about stuff like concrete being one of them, steel being another. As of right now, there's a lot of innovation going on there, but we still need to power those processes with fossil fuels, as opposed to something like solar. And of course, we haven't ramped up our solar and wind infrastructure to the point where we can replace fossil fuels right now. In addition, there's an intermittency problem, which is true. When the sun sets and the wind dies down at night, you need some type of backup power to get you through. Batteries aren't quite there yet, where there's enough batteries and the batteries can last long enough so they can get you through the night when the sun's not shining. So no, there's going to be a transition here. And Catherine and I should tell the folks at home, that we covered a story in Eastern Kentucky where we went and spoke to a coal miner there who had gotten out of the coal mining business. He was like a third or fourth generation, and he ended up getting into the solar business, installing solar panels. So we know that when you disrupt industries, that it actually has a big impact on people's lives. So the important thing here is to make sure as we transition away from fossil fuels that we are taking care of the people who are in those industries, that we're providing them the training they need or providing them the jobs that they need to succeed, and the communities too. And so a lot of that money from the IRA is pouring into those specific communities. I always talk about that story, Catherine. I think it's so interesting because the man that we met, when I asked him, because he was really sick. I mean, he had black lung disease, he had cirrhosis. He thinks it was all related to his mining in the coal mines. But when I asked him, and you remember this, Catherine, because you were listening in on the interview, when I asked him if he regrets being a coal miner, he said, absolutely not. Because it was a part of his community and a part of his family for so many generations, and he was so proud of his lineage. These are the people who built America, right? These communities are what the backbone of our economy is built on. So I think, and you're a climate comm specialist, so when we talk about making transitions, we need to make sure that we're not alienating people who actually helped to build this country. This is not an us versus them. This is let's bring everyone along into this next phase of development here in the U.S., such that we can make a better climate, a healthier climate, combat climate change, and also bring everybody into this with opportunity. And I think it's so important because I think when people look at people like me who are leading on climate communication, they probably think that I'm, against their best interests. And it's actually quite the opposite. I am so happy to see that so much of this money is going into communities that really need it, because we're never going to create change unless we bring everybody along. And we need this change if we're going to save not only humans in the future, my children, right? I have a daughter who's 19 months. I'm very worried about her future for various reasons, not just climate change. But if we're going to make change and do it in an expedient way, to do it as quickly as possible, we need everyone to see that there is benefit and opportunity.
Yeah, and a just transition, as well as, areas where a lot of these polluting industries go. I mean, we can't forget about, those communities as well.
Yeah, and we're not, but we need to keep focusing on that too. So I think we've kind of wrapped up what we were talking about today. Just to kind of put a bow on this, the start of this conversation, the main emphasis of this conversation was that everything is at record levels on Earth, with the exception of just a few things right now. And a lot of that is due to climate change, and on top of it, El Nino. El Nino is going to double in its intensity by fall. So we're going to continue to see more heat being added to the system. And by the way, El Nino is a natural cycle. So, it's not just climate change. And we expected this, by the way, Catherine. We expected to see alarm bells ringing this year. And sure enough, it's the case. By the end of this year, it is very likely we will have seen the warmest year in Earth's history, in recorded history. So we've been keeping records since the 1800s, but for sure back to about 120,000 years. And so that's the premise of this particular talk. I do want to talk more about climate solutions in future episodes too, because we don't want to be all doom and gloom. But I'll just end it here. Okay, Catherine?
Okay.
We know what the problem is. This is not a terminal illness. We know exactly how to solve it. We have exactly the tools that we need right now to solve this problem. And one other thing, there's a lot of opportunity in climate change to make a better future for ourselves. So it's not just about solving problems. It's also about creating better opportunities. Catherine, thank you so much for joining me like usual. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Folks, if you want to read more about Earth's hottest summer in 120,000 years and how actually we're going to be getting hotter over the next couple of months, you can read it on our website, WFLA.com. Again, you can watch it, of course, right here where you're watching it right now. We're going to have this episode on YouTube as well, and you can also listen to it as a podcast on Spotify and Apple Podcasts as well. I will see you again soon for Jeff's Climate Classroom. Thank you so much.
Watch or listen to Jeff's Climate Classroom, powered by ArmorView Window and Door on WFLA social media platforms, and find Jeff's climate reports on WFLA.com.